And the third presentation in this part of our session comes from a team presentation. Dominika Kuśnierz-Krupa, Justyna Kobylarczyk, Michał Krupa, all from Kraków.
Dzień dobry, witam Państwa serdecznie.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to our presentation. On behalf of our team of authors, I would like to present to you the results of our analyzing Dresden's architecture. So it's a game with the past. So we analyzed history and architecture of that city to present a potential impact of history and struggles of Dresden on the buildings and its surroundings. So in terms of time scope, we decided to reach out to the World War II until contemporary time, and we divided that paper into 3 stages and that period. So first of all, we have, of course, World War II, then stage 2, post-war period 1945-1989, and since 1989 until contemporary time. So to talk about the architecture of Dresden after World War II, and we should look back at history of Dresden before World War II. So that was one of the most interesting, one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, often referred to as Florence over the Laba River. And here I'm displaying some pictures of Dresden. So before World War II, Dresden had that quite dense urban system with some representative squares and broad boulevards overlooking the river, Elbe River. And that was that Baroque period historical development. Here see pictures taken at about 900 with the railway station, the old main market square, and the Elbe River Boulevard. And then World War II. This situation changed dramatically in World War II. So Allies bombarding destroyed most of the old city of Dresden. About 75% of the city's building. That happened on the night of the 13th and 14th of February 1945. All the important buildings, so the castle of Saxon princes and Marian church, all suffered and fell victim to that bombardment. So here is the view on Altstadt and the New Market and ruins of St. Mary's Church. Here is another picture showing the ruins of Dresden. And this is the view over the Maria Kirche before World War II and then after the bombardment in 1945. And that is Vega, the palace that again dates back to the early 19th century. On the pictures you can see the palace before World War II and what was left of it as a result of the Allied air raid. And this is a picture showing that castle before World War II and as the result of the air raid. And after World War II, another significant period in the city's history started. So that period ranges from 1945 to 1989. Over a very short period, that is in 4 years, before the German Democratic Republic was was formed, the infrastructure of the city was recreated and rebuilt that the city needed, as well as some buildings and complexes of particular importance for the city. So operations. So the Zwiger Castle and the Japanese Palace were partially rebuilt as some selected parts of the old town. And then, of course, architects, structuralists, and members of Dresden's elite joined the effort of reconstruction, and you can see it on these pictures. So this is the Japanese palace and Zwiger Palace, which are being reconstructed. And then the German Democratic Republic in 1949, 1989. In 1949, the German Democratic Republic was formed, including Dresden within its territory. And that period included some very significant changes in the reconstruction of the city, as well as different approaches to architecture and aesthetics under the very strong influence of the USSR, and the development or rebuilding was modeled on the Soviet patterns. So in that period, broad transportation channels were built, as well as housing residential estates, the so-called building blocks. Social realism, which was an official trend, as also in Poland, combined the decorative aspects and monumentality, symmetry, and it was to convey specific ideological messages. It emphasized the strength of the state, the role of the working class, and faith in the bright future of communism. Prager Straße is a perfect example of that. This is a very representative broad street built in Dresden between 1965 and 75, and on this picture you can see the area before 1960, then 1965, and this is 1970 when that complex was actually erected. And then this is a later period, and after 1970s, a very broad transportation and communication access for pedestrians and vehicles, with buildings of trade, commercial, and office functions. So that was the symbol of the epoch back then, with the whole area and the concept, and that is the period 1970-1990. And then the second structure, the second building that could be the symbol of that period is the palace that was erected in the very center of the old town, between the old and new market. So that building was erected in 1969. So again, pictures of Kulturpalast. Note that Kulturpalast was erected in the very heart of the old town. And then, starting in 1960s, the surrealistic architecture in Dresden began changing and giving room to modernism with prefabricated systems, so that large apartment building blocks could be erected and created for the population. To sum up that period in Dresden's history, one should say that first of all it was, on the one hand, it was subordinated to ideology, but on the other, it followed the social functions, such as wide streets were intended for parades and demonstrations, and housing estates were planned as self-sufficient units with their own schools, kindergartens, shops, and green areas. Note, however, but to a certain extent, historical buildings were neglected, as well as reconstructed reconstruction of the old town. And now let us move on to the period from 1989 to the present. So after Germany's unification in 1990, Dresden architecture underwent major changes. Other centers located in the former East Germany found themselves in a new economic, political, and financial situation. So this way, that allowed a return to the reconstruction of the historical city center. So the efforts were focused on recreating these quarters in the old town, and Marienkirche was recreated, and that involved the reconstruction of the historical districts, and historical buildings were converted with new contemporary details like the Castle of Saxony Princes. New public spaces and spaces for recreation were also created, such as boulevards and walking paths over the Elbe River. So the buildings, and even new buildings, they often refer to events from the past, like the building of this new synagogue. The city continues modernizing the residential apartment buildings, block of flats that go back to the Soviet time and era of the city. So here we can see partially reconstructed parts of the city. So actually the reconstruction goes in two directions. On the one hand, it's reconstruction, but on the other hand, it's about introducing completely new architecture. It is based on the dimensions and on the sizes of the buildings that used to be there historically. And another panorama of the city, and this is a close-up, a focus on these districts which are being recreated. In my opinion, it is a very successful project in terms of historical urban planning. And this is an example of reconstruction of a historical building. So that's what it looked like in 1989, and now it's been very nicely recreated, rebuilt by using the debris, the building material dating back to World War II. And here a commercial function was added, like Altmark Gallery, a gallery, shopping gallery, which is housed in the buildings neighboring on the old square, with many open-air markets organized in that square. And now about historical buildings and introducing contemporary detail. So here I would like to refer to the Museum of Transportation and Technology. That's the building, so Dresden Transport Museums. Both were reconstruction of Johanneum, the former stables. And then we have the castle of the Saxony Princes, the former castle of the Dukes of Saxony, Residenzschloss, adopted to the museum function with a very interesting roofing over the main courtyard.
Zdjęć pokazujących to bardzo duże założenie, prawda? Tu jest to przykrycie.
Few more pictures showing this very large building complex with that roofing like structure over the courtyard. And in the direct vicinity of these complexes, modern buildings and structures were erected. So there is this new synagogue building of 2009 that refers to the old buildings. It's located in the western part of the city, again, over the river. When I think that this is again a very interesting example of a project. And then former military barracks were converted into
bardzo trafnie można wykorzystać
Military History Museum Bundeswehr by Daniel Libeskind. So this is a classical mass of a historic building used for a contemporary function. But actually there are more modern buildings like that. This is a Congress Center, which is in the direct vicinity of the old town again, but it's a very new quality, a new type of creation in the historical space, and that design goes back to 2004. Well, as I said, the city authorities endeavor to modernize and enhance attractiveness of these very green and quite uniform types of spatial arrangements. So these are more examples of these buildings. So actually the results of our analysis clearly and unequivocally indicate the impact of these concepts on the tradition, and then there is this trend to design completely modern architecture, which I demonstrated in my presentation.
Dziękujemy bardzo.
Thank you.